Yeah, my name is Sam, and I grew up in Southeast London. I studied archaeology. It sounds like a CV or something, like a job resume, but I studied archaeology at university. I've always been very interested in history and human beings, but also life generally. So, yeah, coming from like a big fascination with the natural world when I was younger as well, and how human beings impact that and live around that is I suppose quite a lot of me, what I like. But yeah, so after archaeology, I went into work for conservation charities, wildlife conservation charities and things, and then from that I've gone into working in gardens and working with kids and teaching children about growing things, life, and how to keep that going. Yeah, I come from a medium-sized family. I've got 3 older sisters. All of us were born in the 80s. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about myself. God, I mean, it's going to sound really negative, but in some ways it's the future and future instability, which might be a bit of a dark insight into my mind. But yeah, so as I mentioned, I've got quite a lot of interest in nature conservation, wildlife conservation, and politics and history. So yeah, so I spend a lot of time sort of thinking back and forwards and how things have gone and how things are progressing and where we're going. And yeah, so it impacts quite a lot of my choices when I'm thinking about what jobs I want to do and what I want to go and do in the future. Yeah. It's a perspective. I think mindset would be where your mind where you're positioning yourself when thinking or viewing something outside of yourself. So depending on the angle you're looking at it, you could see the same thing either positively or negatively or non-judgmentally, depending on how you position your own mind. I think for much of my life, as sort of maybe as described in my previous answers, but I think I spent much of my mindset. I think it's been quite pessimistically spent pessimistically, or seen as a pessimistic mind, which is something I've been trying to change. So the last few years, I'm trying to sort of think less negatively or less pessimistically, which I think is reinforced by believing that's a kind of rational or grounded perspective. Realism, trying to be realistic, often seems quite negatively, and the belief that the opposite of realism is fantasy and optimism fantasy is optimism is sort of basically I'm trying to move away from judgment in that way and sort of seeing one thing as good and one thing as bad. Because I think I'm increasingly thinking it's a lot more healthy just to not have judgment at all and just take things as they come, because of things about how mindset is a filter. That perspective is a filter of how you take things. So if you constantly take things as negatively, then you'll just continually see the world as negative, and that's not good. Whereas taking things as optimistically isn't just trying to make yourself feel better, and it's not fantasy. It's more open. So when you're more open, you can see things from it stops you being in a fixed mindset, and you can be in a malleable mindset. So yeah, so I'm trying to move from one thing into another, and spend some time in different places. So different mindsets for different days. So as it sounds like I've just answered, but yeah, I think as I say, going from one trying to sort of think less rigidly and more flexibly. I think the biggest shift came about from understanding that sometimes having a fixed mindset or having a kind of thinking that you know things can be very detrimental because it closes you off. So having a kind of much more open mindset comes about from completely accepting that we don't know everything, which I know sounds very kind of obvious, but it just enables often to let go. So yeah, so going from, I think it's changed from being someone who's often trying to grasp or cling on to truth, and realizing that's a sort of form of control. And so by relinquishing control and letting go of like, well, actually truth is lots of different things, is how I've been sort of working more recently, trying to. I think they massively vary. I think that sometimes, I think one of the reasons why I've moved on from, or trying to move on from a kind of more what I'm seeing as a closed mindset, is realizing that quite a lot of people have been around or have been close to in the past have also got a very closed mindset, and I think I've sometimes misconstrued that for confidence and intelligence when actually what I've sort of seen is that it's not quite that, and it can be very, very misguided too. And if you've got a closed mindset, then you're sort of like locked into one sort of way of seeing things. Whether or not you believe that's truth or not, like, it's sort of irrelevant. So the more flexible. So yeah, so I think I've been finding myself sort of drawn to more flexible people than sort of rigid people, and letting go of the idea that rigid people are confident because they also don't know anything. Values are things that we I think take a stand for. They're things that motivate us to make changes if something deviates from that value that you hold. I think so. In an environment, I think you suddenly know your true values by seeing the opposites or those that are not those. And when that happens, if you can't sort of sit there, or you can't sort of stomach it, or you don't want to be around that, that's moving on. So yeah, values are things I think that that also, so sometimes we don't really realize we have until we experience the opposite. Well, without sounding like a complete hypocrite, despite everything I've just said, I think one of my strongest values would be truth, and finding and having agreeable truth, things that are solid, known. Because from that sort of truth, from that that's the root of honesty. And I think that without honesty, then everything is just it's too unknowable. There's no sort of perspective. You can't find a perspective. There's no sort of place to sit because there's too many unknowns. So one of my values, I think, is definitely there's a value in truth. There's a high value in truth and honesty. Yeah, I think the other strongest value would be kindness. So like it's one part is that I think there's an ongoing tension between, a bit like when people talk about honest truth and hard truths being like quite unkind, like that's the kind of one of the strongest tensions of two different values would be, this idea of like, well, honesty and truth is incredibly important and feeds into kindness, is something like that, but it's not an excuse to be like cold. So yeah, kindness as well. Yeah, it's hard because it does just sound similar. I mean, I suppose you could say, what do I value? yeah, in my life would be the people. And yeah, it's a sort of, I suppose, value and gratitude. What am I grateful, and what do I find valuable? And yeah, it would be people and the time that I spend with them, which sounds really sappy, I'm sorry, but that's it. Well, it's a hard one really, because I don't, the use of the word spend is something I'd really resist, because it makes it feel like it's and I know it is a limited resource, but a scarce resource, time, life. But at the same time, feeling like life is a scarce resource hasn't really gone very well for me, because it makes me just feel quite like I'm wasting time, wasted life. And then that's the beginning of a kind of negative spiral, because then that becomes, well, if I've wasted life, fuck it, and I'll just continue wasting things. So no, I prefer thinking of how I spend time, how I use time, how I use my life. It massively varies. So obviously sometimes I have time off, and that's definitely okay. And other times I'm using my life to do what I hope is a good thing. So as I said a bit about with what my background is and who I am, I suppose then it would be into is education. I like to use my life for spreading, sharing the things that I find interesting and useful, because of a strong hunch that they're useful and interesting to lots of other people too. I think the biggest thing that we all value, and obviously I'm part of society, but I think the biggest thing that I've noticed people, I don't know if this is a historical thing, like a long historical thing, but I think it's probably a human thing that we've all valued all for a long time, is security, and looking for security. And I think that's the root of the kind of need for money, need for housing, even need for families and having children and things like that. The root, I think, a lot of society's anxieties and what they're trying to remedy is a root is a security thing. That's what motivates lots of our politics and what we vote for, I think, as well. Looking for safety and security. What is enough? Well, in terms of good old Maslow, like, enough would be food, shelter, water, a safe place to have kids, raise family. That should be enough. That's enough and I think it is enough for lots of us, because from that we can develop other things. So from that to even if it's to alleviate what would happen, what would become boredom if you just have all your basic needs, then it would become you'd want to intellectually stimulate yourself or get busy doing other things or just do things. So yeah, what we need is pretty basic. What life needs to thrive is pretty basic. It's the same group of things, but it's what we don't have. So what I just said about society valuing security, I think that came to my head as the number one thing. It's the one thing that we don't have. Well-being and health would be, yeah, so returning to those values. So those needs that all living things need, including humans. That's the root of good health. So it'd be, yeah, adequate, good, healthy food, obviously water, and shelter from things that are threatening to us, whether it's the weather or whether it's other beings, other life. That's what we need for health. And then, as I say, from that, we automatically would have social connection and relationships and support and security. That would give us health. It's again return, without all my answers sounding the same, but it's returning to the same basic needs. I think from knowing, I mean, it's one of the weird things that I've picked up from playing video games, from being a child and playing little simulations, and whether we're helping little groups of people and things like that. Like, hilariously, one of the routines that they routinely build into video games when using simulations of people is bars that show, you know, how much food and how happy they are for social interactions, all various things. And hilariously, one thing that comes back into my mind when feeling unhealthy or feeling down is a sort of almost like a body scan, which is why I look like it reminds me of what happens with meditative practices, where you sort of can scan yourself and be like, well, what have I forgotten? Why do I feel bad today? Or why do I feel unhealthy today? And it's like checking things off on a list. Because I definitely think that in terms of anxiety and feeling unhealthy mentally, a massive part of that is not knowing what's causing that. I mean, knowing that it could just be oh, I haven't eaten any magnesium for a little while, and knowing that various nutrient deficiencies can make us feel quite anxious or depressed or various things, or having too much coffee. It's like, oh, why do I feel like, oh yeah, that's it, this is my fourth cup of coffee accidentally, you know. And it's just, once you know, then it's you can sort of mitigate things and feel much more healthy. Yeah, one of the biggest unhealthy feelings is anxiety and not knowing something. So I think strength and resilience make me think of the Aesop's fable with the oak tree and the reed. So both strength and resilience are in that story typified, represented. I mean, using a reed, a grass, or an oak tree, and it's this competition with the wind, and the oak tree and the reed, and the wind is trying to blow them both down. Whereas the reed is not particularly strong, but is incredibly resilient and can bounce back and flow backwards and forwards and doesn't break. Whereas the oak tree is incredibly strong, but can also break and be rigid. And I think that, yeah, strength and resilience. That story is showing that they're sort of two sides. They can be two sort of ends of a spectrum, but at the same time, being a bit of both, being a bit of one and being a bit of the other at different times, perhaps is yeah. That's what that springs to mind. That's what comes to mind. Probably from clinging maybe fatally to knowledge. So knowing things is what brings me strength. So as I say, if I'm feeling anxious or if I'm feeling unwell, so when ill with COVID, potentially, possibly COVID, last year, excuse me, but feeling very ill, having a fever, feeling not being able to sleep and laying in bed and feeling my heart rate and feeling really anxious about all different things, like is that a pain in my lungs, what's going on, you know, and just have I you know, infected people, what's going on? And lots of my mind going elsewhere. And I remember thinking consciously in this sort of fever dream that I have the knowledge, I can, because I've done it before and I've done it another times and I've read enough that I know that the body can do that, the mind can do this. I brought the mind completely to a place which I knew was safe, and I was like, well, I can't deal with anything else. So I consciously went through and told myself these things and brought myself back into a safe, like, relax, it's okay, and instantly, like, basically don't remember anything else. Would have fallen asleep, woke up feeling fine. So I drew in that point in time when I was feeling really like I didn't have any strength whatsoever. What gave me strength at that point was knowing something, knowing that my mind could do this, knowing that I could do this. And I think the same thing about the world and feeling sometimes incredibly unhappy about how things are going or how things could be panning out. And what gives me a lot of strength in that is knowing certain things about how human beings work together, knowing human beings don't generally want to screw each other over, knowing that human beings generally are thinking, positively, or don't want to see the world burn. They want to see it thrive and be happy and grow, you know. And it's knowing that is a strength. Yeah. Mm. Well, okay, I mean, again, with repeating myself, I hope not too much, but yeah, that I suppose what comes to mind, because I just mentioned it, was in the midst of feeling like I had COVID and the first night of having a really bad illness, and so not knowing if this was the beginning of a week of feeling ill, would I end up in hospital, would everyone around me get ill, what would happen, you know? So that point in time where I was just like, what, I don't know what tomorrow will be like, that this could be awful. Yeah, I needed a lot of strength when that was happening. Apart from that, other times when things have not gone so well in life, in terms of things that are completely out of control, people dying, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, they're definitely connected. I'm getting the. I think they're probably connected through. Yeah, maybe the things it's made me think about. So like the idea of, yeah, the hierarchy of needs, or the things that life needs, how human beings are dealing with, how our society perhaps is dealing with the stresses and turbulence of rampant 21st century capitalism. Yes and no. I think that there's yeah, I think a lot of people just have sort of too much on to think about a lot of things like this, you know, like they're having kids or working full time, or well, yeah, that's about it. But yeah, just doing lots of other things. So yeah, no, I don't think a lot of people think about what's motivating society, what values society holds. I think people are often too stressed, or too, as I say, too busy to be thinking about things on that level. I'm lucky; I don't have any kids and barely a job. That was sarcasm. No, not really. Hope it was what you're looking for, and hope it was helpful.